think there are a lot of people who might be at the stage where they have a manuscript that they want to publish. And I think if you're not super tech savvy, that can be a stumbling block for people. So it's just good to know there's such thing as a book designer and then a cover designer.
That was Carrie Vrabel sharing details of her publishing process. Stay tuned to hear more about Carrie's journey as a writer here on Pages and Voices. I'm your host, Meg Bell. We'll be right back after the intro. Welcome to Pages and Voices, the local author podcast, sponsored by the Allen County Public Library. This podcast is dedicated to featuring the works of talented authors within our community. Welcome to the podcast, Carrie. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
We are going to begin with you reading an excerpt from your book, The Place Where Buildings Go, which was published in 2021. So the floor is yours.
Okay. Today, most of Claypool, Indiana, is farmland that big agribusiness companies have invisibly purchased. What's left are rotting farmhouses that the families of old farmers and farmers' wives, either dead or in nursing homes, rent to men who want the space to shoot their rifles. There are tall, oddly shaped boys with shorts to their knees and 100 flea bites, little red dots, and the night, and men moving out in it. The land here has been made flat and plain, a place for trains to cross, carrying corn syrup and soybeans to people who don't know they're waiting for it, for thin trees to silhouette themselves against sunsets. Death sits on us bare, like the day sits on the hill, like the night sits on the lake. And I guess the men manage their fear of waiting for it by hammering objects into the ground and inventing occupations, and the women push it away by convincing themselves that men know something they don't, that the work men do holds a truth that is the natural extension of a shelter logic, a logic that begets shelter. Men split the world, the outside, the inside, and now the outside is as strange and unfamiliar as a dream.
Thank you for sharing from your book, which really is richly poetic and it's full of prose. Anyone that really knows you knows that the subject matter of your book is important to you. So when did you start thinking, this is something I'm going to write? I'm going to start incorporating this into a book and put it out to the world?
Yeah, I had my way of writing is sort of strange. I think for a lot of years I never really sat down and said, okay, I'm gonna write a novel. It was sort of a way of recording a perspective or recording ideas that would just sort of, like, I'd be driving or I'd be, walking somewhere and just these like lines would just pop in my head. And it felt like that was sort of my truest voice, Mm-hmm. And so I had notebooks and notebooks and notebooks. I mean, I think when I started writing this, I probably had like a Word document, because what I would do is I'd write them by hand and then I would type them up in a Word document. And then I would end up with these crazy like 800-page Word documents of these little snippets, these little paragraphs, or maybe 2 paragraphs here and things like that. And it was so frustrating to me. I wanted to share it because it felt like, for whatever reason, all my like pleaser tendencies when I'm, it was something that it bypassed all of that. And I was just able to like say what I meant. And it felt like I was saying it in the way I really wanted to say it. So I wanted to figure out a way to share it. And I didn't really consider it poetry, but so it was kind of prose, but it wasn't like a linear narrative where I'm like plotting it and thinking, right. How can I, it's totally just a really pure form of self-expression. And so I decided, I read Marilyn Robinson's Housekeeping, her book Housekeeping, which is like just a masterpiece, a beautiful writing, and talk about poetic prose. Like her writing is stunning. And I think it really inspired me that I could figure out kind of a loose narrative. Like her book is so much about the words and the ideas. And it's a really like a cross between poetry and prose. So I decided, and it was a novella. So I decided I would just put it together as a novella and try to sort of thread it, like base it on a story that was familiar to my family. These two, a mother and daughter, living out in the middle of the country, surrounded by these hunters and this sort of like threat of violence and things like that. And just sort of weaving together these snippets in a way that pushed the narrative forward. And I don't know. I mean, it was an experiment,
right?
For sure. It was definitely an experiment. So that was where it started.
Do you feel like it's got a lot of nonfiction aspects to it then, if it's got?
Not a ton. I mean, it's definitely based on real life, but it's not a direct, like, it's, some of maybe one or two scenes actually I took from my life, but I think a lot of it was just sort of knowing that part of the rural northern Indiana and
Yeah.
just kind of piecing it together that way.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Do you think you'll write more along these lines? Or is this like a one and done for you, or are you gonna keep going along
Yeah, it's
the
a really
prose and poetry?
right. It's a good question. I don't know. It's funny, and I think I wonder if other authors who might be listening to this would wonder if they have this conversation with themselves. But there it feels like there's this tension between just purely using writing to express myself. Like maybe people would do it in a journal or through like really personal poetry or just things that are just like I'm writing to myself. Sometimes I feel like I'm writing like to the sun or something, like just to like
Yeah.
to write something down and to say this happened. Like I
It's like
need to like
therapy.
yeah, and a way to like record and feel like you're not
Mhm.
invisible. Like if you write it
Right.
down, then maybe it actually happened. It's not just like within me. And so I feel like there's that writing that I do and it helps me and it is a way of processing the world. But then there's sort of a shift when I'm thinking about writing for an audience. So writing like a fiction story, or I did a lot of like I've written freelance. I've done lots of different types of writing. So I've written freelance for websites, um, and I've done some articles for some journals, and even all the way to like super nonfiction, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but I just signed a
Mhm.
contract with Indiana University Press to write a field guide for wild edible plants native to the state of Indiana, which is like
Woohoo.
science. So it's like all the way from like weird personal poetry stuff to science, there's
When
a
you're
whole,
good, you're good.
oh my gosh, yeah. And when I can't do anything else, you can't do anything else. But
Whatever.
I think there's this mindset shift that happens for me when I'm writing for an audience. And it's funny because I tend to not like it as well when I'm writing, knowing that, thinking about like, how are people going to interpret this? And I'm trying to be really clear and really like, and I always feel kind of the way I feel in real life. I feel kind of dumb and awkward. And I'm like, but then people seem to react to that better than they do to my like super personal writing that I think is super authentic.
Mhm.
And it's just this constant like battle with those two extremes. So I've thought about doing just straight fiction, but it's always tempting to go back to these really raw, honest little pieces of writing that just come, that just
Very
sort of seem to be
naturally.
the way I process things. And
Mhm.
so it's just, yeah, it's sort of maybe that's what nobody wants, but that's what I want. That's what I
No, that
do.
makes
And
complete sense. I get it.
so,
Yeah,
yes.
completely understand.
Yeah.
So when did you start thinking of yourself as a writer? Have you always thought that?
I tend to have a really broad definition of that. Like, I basically think, everyone who uses the written language to express themselves or to communicate, like, I think that they're writers. So to me, probably when by the time I was in college and I started taking writing classes, that probably gave me some confidence in being able to say that. But I really think looking back, it started when I was in 3rd grade and I got in trouble because I kept forgetting my homework at school. I would forget my books. I wouldn't take them home with me to school, and partly it's because I really hated my teacher and I wanted to pretend like school wasn't happening for that whole year. So I was
Yeah.
just like in
Just
denial.
leave it over here.
So I'm just like, "Oh, I forgot that." And, so my mom and my teacher got so frustrated with me that they gave me this little Garfield notebook and said I had to write all of my homework assignments every day in this little notebook. And then I had to, at the end of the day, before I left, I had to check my homework assignments and make sure I had every book I needed to complete those homework assignments. And, so I started doing that, but I was just kind of irritated by it. And then I remember during class when I was bored, I'd start just writing little things like, like, this teacher, I won't say her name. I don't know if she's probably not, I don't know if she's still teaching. Probably not. I'm old. But I would say like, Mrs. X, wears tennis shoes with her skirt, or like, I don't know, just little like things to myself,
That
like
you
just,
saw around you?
right. And I
Mhm.
really think that's really the time when writing crossed over from being a thing I had to do in school, to a thing that I was using to like have this relationship with myself or with, my daily life. So
Mhm.
I never would have thought it at the time, but I think that's when it started.
Right. Okay. Very good. So what's the most difficult part of the writing process for you?
Oh my gosh, the self-criticism, the total, like,
Yeah.
I hate every I mean, you get that moment of inspiration, you write something down and it's like, yes, and it feels amazing. And then you read it the next day and it's just like, who wrote this? What happened? I feel, and also when I do try to write for an audience, I think the feeling that the self-consciousness flood in is really I hate
Questioning
that. Yeah.
yourself.
It's painful to
Mhm.
like try to, think of, well, what could someone be thinking if they're reading this, and going through that whole like spiral is really unpleasant. But yeah, that critical voice, if I could just,
Turn it
get
off.
rid of that, everything would be fine.
I understand. I feel the same way about
Yeah.
my own writing.
Yeah.
So, what is the most enjoyable part?
Definitely the moment when you have an idea. I think it was like PJ Harvey who said like that nothing is better. Your work is the best in it, like when you get the first idea, and then it's just all downhill from that. I feel like when you get to something you weren't expecting to get to because you jotted something down and like the next line followed. That's part of why usually I do handwriting, because it seems like I think it better if I'm typing it. Sometimes I miss those connections, but I'll get like this insight of like, yes, that is exactly the metaphor, or that's the connection, that's the piece that in
Right.
that moment where you really think you've made some progress,
Nailed it.
which of course it disappears the next day, but at least that feeling for a moment that there's like forward motion, and you've discovered something really magical and cool, and
Right.
yeah, that's the best part.
I know when I write too, so when I really feel like I'm in the groove and doing it, it's like, you get a thrill, you get a rush, and it is very exciting. And then if it's not coming, it's like, oh, I'm just going to set this aside, and then I don't want to pick it up. And I wish I didn't lean into those feelings so hard. I wish I could just keep doing it. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
tricky.
Yeah, you're a great writer. Yeah, I think it is tempting to sort of not, if those moments aren't coming, to sit down and make yourself like structure yourself and have a routine. And I don't know very many writer friends who are really able to keep like a super rigid daily, like I'm going to sit down and write for 4 hours or 6 hours. I know George Saunders, who I love. I love him. And for whatever reason, I don't know how he's made a deal with his like critical voices. He seems to be in like on another plane. He says that he spends 6 hours a day, almost every day. This is according to him, 6 hours a day. And he has this little like writing hut that he goes to. And he says that's like the best part of his day. And I mean, I am
Man,
like, I'm on a roller coaster
I
of
know.
like,
Same.
existential dread and like self hate and whatever. So I think that would be magical. I would love to be able to feel that way about writing.
I have to be inspired,
Yeah.
For me, it's that art. It's that piece of art, and that I have to be inspired to keep going. So
Yeah.
need to tap into George.
I know. I wish he could like be my therapist.
Have you learned anything really like helpful? I know you've done some writing courses through the years. Have you learned anything helpful in those courses that have helped you push through those moments, or any tips that you can give other
Yeah.
writers?
Yeah. Sure. Again, like my whole thing, I've taken tons of writing courses, and I think I always go into them like deciding this is the year I'm going to crack it. I'm going to find a structure and, figure out a way to make what I consider my really authentic voice be more palatable to an audience, that kind of thing. And it never works. But, so I have resisted that for a lot of years, but I will say that when it comes to writing for an audience, if you have a goal in mind of publishing something, I think it really helps to do an emulation of somebody. So we did a ton of these when I was in all of my writing classes, where you'd find whether it was poetry or fiction, like short story, and you'd choose a certain poem or a certain short story, just one, and read through it really carefully. And you're thinking about subject matter and tone and different like quirks of maybe their turns of phrase that particular author uses, and then do your best to basically write your version of that, like,
Mm-hmm.
so pretend like in the style of this person. And that was, I think, a really helpful, because all the time, first of all, you realize that it's really hard to do. I mean, you feel like it always comes out in your voice in a certain way. Like I always think, oh, I'm going to be so derivative and sound just like, and then it ends up like you can never really match the other person.
Mm-hmm.
But it also, I think, is a good way to figure out where you are most comfortable. And there had been times when I've tried to do those emulations in college, and I just hated it. Like whatever. Sometimes the teacher would randomly give you an author. Sometimes you could pick one. And let's say I got some random person who I just couldn't stand their writing style, and it was just like, miserable. And it feels good to know what you don't want to do too,
Mm-hmm.
so you can kind of find a little bit of finding your way that way. But yeah, I'd say if you're looking to write for publication, I think that's really helpful.
Okay. So how many books have you actually written over the years? Have you only ever written just one official book and the rest of it is your notebook full of
Yeah, this is the official book until I finish I've started the manuscript for the wild edibles field guide, which I guess you could call a book. I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I have thousands of pages of, I mean, literally that, like probably 3,000 or more pages of writing, but it's all like in this disjointed, kind of these little pieces
Uh-huh.
that have come to me over the years that I keep them like a record, because otherwise I do have this weird, I don't know if it's like superstition or something, but it's this idea that those things, I need to keep them, because that's like a record of my life and of a perspective that I don't think is, there's also an activism thread in everything, as you know,
Mhm.
as
Yes.
everything that I do. So I think there's something about like making, showing that perspective when I don't see it in the culture. Like there's something that feels worthwhile about keeping that stuff in writing. So I have this backlog of stuff, and I don't know. I mean, I've definitely I've written some short stories. I've done some short form stuff, but this is the only book
Okay.
length thing I've ever finished. Yeah.
It's interesting that you have those notebooks because I have that. I have the same thing. So mine's full of Post-it notes that I've written stuff on.
Yeah.
And so then put the Post-it notes in there. And so when I was looking to start a new poem recently, I just jumped into the book and grabbed one of my Post-it notes and used that as a prompt.
Yeah.
So that was really helpful. And some of them I could it's like a puzzle, it's kind of
Yeah.
interesting. So it makes me wonder if all writers have the notebook, you know?
Yeah, I'd be so curious to know. I feel like, um, I think a lot of them do. I think some people call it a journal, and some
Mhm.
people write it in a more linear style, like someone like David Sedaris, for example, who, I guess, he really just sits down and it's like these little stories of what happened today,
Uh-huh.
and that's not, my stuff is just like these raw sentences of like desperation or whatever,
Trauma, rooted in trauma.
yeah,
Mine are.
whatever I have to, whatever's like I have to write down, or I might not get through the
Right.
day. Um, so so yeah, I think probably a lot of writers do, but I know there are some writers who really view it, I think really appreciate it more as a craft, when they're really approaching it as like, I want to write a novel, and they, really just being able to sit down and really start to draft the novel from start to finish without sometimes that backlog of my stuff, when it comes to a project, like if I were going to approach writing a novel,
Right.
I think like the way I did this novella that I just read from, I think in the future I might give it a try without referencing that old
N
stuff, because it almost makes it
Gets in
harder.
the way.
Yeah, in a lot of,
Mhm.
if you're thinking of something that you want to be for an audience, like an enjoyable read,
Right.
sometimes I think it's easier to think of yourself talking to someone, because that's more of the communication side of it versus the stuff that I'm writing really for myself, and for like the big invisible whatever in the world, so yeah, I think they're the two different approaches. I see it as two different sort of ways at it. Yeah.
Okay. So do you then when you write with our notebooks, obviously, that's a sort of a fly by the seat of the pants deal. But when you wrote this, were you plotting that or did you closer? Did you have an outline? Did you follow something?
Very loosely. And I think what I really focused on was I knew something. I was fine with having little scenes. Like the little scenes were already there, little snippets, little vignettes, little moments between characters. Like that part was easy. But I think the harder part was figuring out what's the big thing that's going to happen. Like not necessarily big like a, tornado or something, but big, like emotionally big, like where's that sort of unexpected transformation point, like
Mhm.
and that was a really big struggle for me to figure out, to decide. I thought a lot about that, because I knew it needed to hinge, if I'm going to call this a novella and not just a collection of poems or prose poetry or little vignettes or, diary. There have been some beautiful published diaries that are gorgeous. Things like that. If I'm going to have it, say it's a novella and really make it a story, then I need to have like something happen, something
Right.
that's shifts everything, And so that's as far as I went. So I did so many different versions and came up with different ideas. And yeah, I think that's as close to outlining as I got. And then once I knew what that was going to be, I could figure out how I was going to lead up to that and then how that was going to change things, then it kind
Mhm.
of made a little more sense as a novella.
Was there any part of the book that was difficult for you to write? Were there any scenes that really hit you hard?
Oh, yeah. I would say the hardest parts were probably the parts that were closest to things that had happened in my life, like there's a grandmother character in the book, that who this isn't the big thing that happens, but she passes away, which isn't a surprise because she's been bedridden for a long time, and that's something that mirrors what happened in my life, and so that was a tough chapter
Mhm.
to write, just the brought up memories of things like that. I think
Absolutely.
I think the whole thing in some ways, because like I said, like this was really an attempt in my this book was an attempt for me to really share what I consider to be really like authentic, sort of bold, honest feelings and perspectives that I had about like animals, for example, or about, women and men and, hunters and violence and gun, all different kinds of topics like that. And I think probably the overarching hardest thing was just making knowing that I was gonna make it into something that I was gonna offer for people to read and not letting myself round off the edges too much. I think I was always catching myself. There's so many different versions of the way I edited this. I wanted to stay bold, but I also didn't wanna alienate people, you
Sure.
know? And I think, again, with the activism piece of that, it makes it really complicated. It's really hard to write about animals and not alienate people, and it's really
Mhm.
hard to, like, keep people's minds open, and let them and not be kind of written off and things like that. And I
Right.
think I definitely let some of that get to me. And I think if I had to do it over again, now that I'm older, and I would probably be even bolder and just try and just decide this stuff needed to be out there. And if, forget so much about how people might receive it. I wish I could go even, that's sort of an ongoing struggle too, along with the critical voice, but just like not worrying as much about how it's going to be received and
And
just
are you talking mostly about how you feel about animals? The activism for animals?
Yeah, I would say that's probably there are definitely there's some major, like, feminist themes that
Mhm.
also, which feels like the culture is a little more open now to listening to those
Y
perspectives.
Yes.
So I would say, yes, the animal really representing animals in a rural setting and giving consideration to their experiences and considering them, their lives as worthy as human lives and sort of pointing out the crazy ways that things that humans do to animals without even thinking but then when thinking and intentionally doing it, because the whole part, northern rural Indiana is, there are slaughterhouses everywhere, chicken houses. I mean, my grandfather was a chicken farmer. Like that part's true. That's in the book as well. So those topics, I think it's really hard because as soon as people hear that, I don't think yet in our culture has been a language that people are allowing to really consider the non-human animals perspective. Like it's still considered this fringe crazy idea,
Sure.
and people get offended and think that I'm whatever. And so I think, now that you've said that, that probably is like the real major point that as soon as you say like dog and cat, people's minds go to like pets instead of like, no, can I wish I had a different word for dog or cat that made that person a person. You know what
Right.
I mean?
Right.
And I know that's a total, like, people view that as like a crazy, unwieldy, impractical way of viewing the world because we couldn't like function the way we function if we really thought that about animals. We'd have to like stop and not do stuff. And,
It would be completely
it'd be a
different.
completely different, and people
Mhm.
get overwhelmed with that. And then, and I understand totally that response, but it's like, but then how do you talk about it? Still
Right.
have to talk
Have a
about it. How do
conversation
you,
about
yeah.
it
How
and
can we open
and
that
try to change minds and
or
hearts,
just, and you just allow
enlighten.
the perspective yeah, is
Mhm.
a whole thing. So definitely that, yeah.
And before I met you, you're the first person that ever helped me see animals in that way.
Oh,
So I I always
thanks.
found that really interesting. Do you know other people that feel the same way as you do? Have you met others?
Yeah, I have a few people all across the country, and even one woman in Australia that I had some like Zoom chats with that was really great. But yeah, I think there
So there are
definitely
other
are.
people.
There definitely are. Yeah, there are people out there, and that it's just a small. Being the people pleaser that I am, it's like it's not okay if it's only a small number of people, and the rest of the people think I'm crazy attacking lady or what, you know. And growing up
I've never
around
thought
here,
that about you.
I've probably been overly sensitive to that response just over the years. So,
Sure.
but yeah, you know me well. That's very true. That's a very big challenge for me in anything that I write, for sure.
The other thing I wanted to touch on about the book was your publication process. How did you go about getting your book published?
I am so glad you asked me that because I would love, there's so many ways to do it. When I was in college, for a short time, I worked at Author House in Bloomington because I went to IU in Bloomington and I'm in my 40s. So it's a while ago and I don't know what it's like now. I think it's still around. I think they're still doing it. But it was one of those like you pay like $3,000 or $4,000 or whatever and they publish this book. And I think that's where I got this really bad attitude about self-publishing because some of the books that came through there were
Subpar.
subpar is a nice way of putting it.
Mhm.
Like, people, no one would edit them. It depends on how much money you wanted to pay, right? So
Mhm.
some people just sent in whatever and they were full of, typos that they didn't make sense or like, and they could send in their own, like one woman, her author photo was like herself in a bikini in a hot tub and like, there were some just really strange, it was kind of fun, but there were some really
Eye-opening
strange.
experience for you.
So I had this idea that self-publishing was sort of like the equivalent of when your kid draws a bunch of cute pictures and you want to bind it into a book and give it to him for Christmas. Like it just didn't feel like anyone would ever take it seriously if I self-published it. So I sent it out like a sample of my manuscript. I sent to some agents and I sent to some small independent publishing companies that will actually read submissions without an agent. I really went the traditional route thinking I was going to have somebody publish it for me. I didn't receive any feedback from the agents, but I sent it to one independent press based in Oregon and the editor wanted to ask for the whole manuscript. So that was super exciting, like
Yeah.
that he was interested enough that he wanted to like really evaluate the whole thing. And then after he read that, he asked me to talk with him on the phone. Basically, he came really close. Like he wanted there to be more plot. I mean, this thing is really a cross between poetry and fiction. Like it's a
Right.
real, so he thought that the kinds of work that they had in their catalog was much more straight ahead fiction stuff. And he wanted me to sort of give it more of that feel. And I was so done with the book. I was like,
Uh-huh.
and he was so nice, but I just said, I don't think I can do that.
I've put
And
this one
I
to
don't
bed.
think I could. I don't even know if I could. So I decided I was going to self-publish that. In order to I didn't want to go through a company like Author House, maybe because of my biases from being a college kid and doing it that way, but also because this is so slippery of me. But I thought if I make my own publishing company, then it will look like a real publishing company published it because technically it did, even though I'm the publishing company.
Right.
But also I thought it would be cool, like maybe down the line, if my mom also writes, and so maybe I could publish something of hers and just felt like a nice thing. So the first thing I did was start this business called Permanent Record Press. And it's just, I filed it with Indiana and state of Indiana. And I put up a website, really simple thing. I wanted to do print on demand. So like right now, that's a really common way for people to self-publish. They can just go through Amazon. You can basically have a manuscript that has to be formatted a certain way, and you get it formatted a certain way. You can either do it yourself, which is pretty tricky, or you can pay someone to do it, which is what I did. And they format it, they use the font you want, they get it all laid out correctly, and then you upload it to the Amazon Print on Demand Center, and then they print you some samples, and then you
I
make sure
see.
that they look good and everything's okay. And then they put it up. It's on their website available for purchase. And then it's basically they print them as people order them. So you don't have to like commit to buying like 500 books and keeping them in your basement, and trying to.
Yes.
Now, the downside, of course, is that you make less money per book. There are all these deals where people are taking little pieces of things, but I wasn't like trying to get rich from this book. So I had the manuscript. I proofread it. I had George Calamaris, who is a wonderful
Yes.
person.
I know George.
a local poet and just a wonderful human being. Oh my
Mhm.
gosh. He spent so much time with me and he was just wonderful.
Oh,
And he
that's
also
great.
wrote a nice little excerpt or little review of the book that I put on the cover and he's just great. So
Uh-huh.
he was wonderful. So I felt like I had everything locked in and the manuscript was ready to go. And then I sent it to the book layout designer person. And I can't remember. I feel like I might have paid like $500 or something. I don't remember how much it cost to have someone lay it out. But she did this great thing where, we talked about font and we talked about how we wanted the chapters spaced and all of that. And she sent me some proofs to make sure everything looked right. And she basically just makes it so that it'll look right on the page and it'll match the Amazon requirements for the formatting, like how much margin and all these little
How did you
details.
find her? Was she somebody online or was she local?
She's somebody online.
Okay.
And I believe I probably just Googled,
Okay.
who for book designers, I think they're called. I've got it here in the book. I mentioned her because I also had someone do the cover.
That's was going to be
Okay,
another question.
yeah, book design by Leah Lococo was who did the book design, and that's who she actually how the words are going to look on the page, like how big the font's going to be, And there are people who I think are able to sort of figure out how to do this themselves. That you don't have to,
Right.
do that. But I
They have the
wanted it
skill
to
set.
be, I wanted to give it its best chance. I wanted it to look super professional and
I understand.
whatever. So I had her do that, and then I had the cover designed. Cover design was by Julie Metz. And I know I found her online. I believe she did the cover for Barbara Kingsolver Poisonwood Bible,
Oh,
I
yeah.
think that was how I found like check me if I'm wrong, I'm sorry, but I think that's how I found her. And again, she was another chunk of money. I don't remember how much. But so we talked about the book and I gave her, I think like an excerpt and then she gave me some options for the cover and what I thought. And we went back and forth and then she formatted it also to, you know what? She might have actually been the one who recommended Leah Lococo now that I'm thinking back on it.
Oh, sure. That makes sense.
That might have been what it was. I might have gone to the cover designer first and then she might
Mhm.
have, I think that's now that I'm thinking about it, I think that's how it happened. I get asked that a lot. And I remember when I worked at the library, people would ask, I don't know if people still ask you a lot, but I think there are a lot of people who might be at the stage where they have a manuscript that they want to publish.
Mhm.
They want to put it on Amazon and use the print on demand because it's super easy. You literally just sign up for an account and, put it out there. But there are those restrictions. And I think if you're not super tech savvy, like maybe I don't know if it requires the use of like Adobe Illustrator or if you can do it in Word. I'm not exactly sure what all of that is because I never attempted it myself.
Okay.
But that can be a stumbling block for people. So it's just good to know there's such thing as a book designer and then a cover designer.
That they have options
That
for
they have
that.
options and then they can give you the file and the file is print ready. So the thing that they gave me was just ready to upload to Amazon. Amazon said, great. And then like maybe a week later, I get the sample books in the mail to make sure that everything looks okay. Once I okay it, then it's available for sale.
Oh my gosh. Was that how long did that whole process take?
I was slow. Uh, I think it probably took 2 months. And I think you could do it faster if you aren't like indecisive and riddled with insecurity. But it was pretty fast. Like the book designer and the cover designer, the turnaround was super fast for them. They didn't
Okay.
seem to have much of an issue. They have like the little magic tricks about how they I'm
Sure.
sure they do a million of them, so they know
They
how
know
to
what's
do
going
it.
on. They know
Yeah.
what the deal is.
Yeah.
So I want to change gears a little bit here. If you could spend the day with another author, dead or alive, who would it be? I think I know who you're going to say, but you might surprise me.
Oh my gosh. I guess okay, George Saunders obviously I love, right? And he needs to tell me how to get rid of my critical voices. But I also really I loved Howard Zinn. He's passed away now. He wrote A People's History of the United States and
Okay.
he's definitely someone who is an activist and just a super kind human being. And I would have really liked to talk to him. I love Alice Walker too.
Oh, she's on my list. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
she was such a big influence on me, especially when I was growing up. Um, and then David Sedaris, but I love him. I can't believe what he gets away with. He's so funny. He makes me laugh more than any other writer on the
Uh-huh.
planet. But I know like it's just I could never write like him. I would have to really like change my brain wiring for to
Uh-huh.
be able to just say what I thought like that. But
I thought you were going to say Mary Oliver.
Oh, I love, yes, Mary. Yeah, she is, she's one of the few poets that I really, poetry was always hard. I was never, I think that's part of why I didn't really want my stuff to be poetry because I hadn't fallen in love with a poet.
Uh-huh.
And I'd fallen in love with people like Alice Walker growing up, and then George Saunders when I was in college. I he had just started being published when I was in college, and I was just obsessed. I thought he was the coolest thing. So yeah, Mary Oliver would definitely be. If there was one poet, I would pick her.
I was going to ask you one question, but I think what is your kryptonite as a writer? And I'm going to say your critical voice.
Yes, my critical voice. It's terrible. Yeah, I would say that's the worst.
If your book were made into a movie, who would star in it?
Oh my gosh. That is such a good question. I think I love like a Michelle Williams
Oh, yeah.
because she can really do like she was in a great movie Meek's Cutoff,
Okay.
which is sort of set in like the I don't know, Western frontier, something like that. I feel like she's just has that kind of like she's strong, but she's always in like a really bad situation,
Yeah, she does play those roles a lot. Yeah, you're
Somehow she
right.
just like makes it seem cool to be
Yeah,
like in a
yeah.
bad situation.
So, and then I was going to ask, you're working on any new projects? We know you're doing the wild edibles or the field guide.
Yeah, it's a field guide. Yeah, so it's really like it's foraging is something that I love. And so I have not ever really tried to write about foraging. It just hasn't been something they just seem like two different worlds. Like I go out and I forage and I get to know these plants and it's this beautiful experience and then I don't know, I just come home and write about like my problems. So I don't think about writing about the beautiful plants and the
Well,
beautiful
nature just
world.
sort of opens all that up. That's what I think.
Yeah.
Whenever I'm out in
It's
nature,
like
it does
it's
the
like
same thing
that's
for me.
exactly like that's my opportunity to like let all of the like upsetting unsolvable problems really just flood on in and
Yeah, wash over
write
you.
about those.
Uh-huh.
That's crazy. But so I've thought about trying to do some like nature essays or trying to spin it that way. But again, it's that tension between what do I want to write and what do I think I want to communicate to an audience. And if I want to communicate to an audience, I don't know if it's through writing. Maybe it's through, drawing. Maybe it's through like speaking. I don't know, something else. And so there's always that in the way there. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's coming up. And I have like a year to finish that. And by the way, something good to mention anyone who's interested in, if you're doing, at least for me, it was in the nonfiction world, but so Indiana University Press has a proposal option on their website. You can propose a book that you would like for them to publish. And it's this really, it took me like 2 months to finish this. But again, I'm slow. Like it could take a normal person like 8 hours or something. But you have to come up with like 2 sample chapters. And this does apply for fiction, I think, on their website. But double check me and go to their website and look. But so I put up this like elaborate proposal, sent it off. And then they said it takes about 2 months to respond. So about a month and a half later, I got an email from the editor of IU Press who said, your book sounds like a perfect fit for our catalog. Let's talk. And so we did a Zoom talk and it was great. And then they sent me the contract and I signed it. So that's a very traditional, that's somebody who does not have an agent going to a certain kind of press that accepts proposals and submissions from people who don't have agents and then them liking what you sent and moving forward. That's one really nice way of doing that. But not
Okay.
all publishers will do that. There are a lot of like those big publishers, you really have to go to an agent first. But that was my little experience with IU Press. Yeah.
I didn't realize that you approached Sim. I had no
Yeah.
idea that writers could do that. So that's really helpful to know.
Yeah. And I will say again, like, I think it's so much easier I'm assuming it's based on my experience for all these years with my other types of writing that I've done, the deep expression stuff, but this concrete, science kind of writing. I feel like I had a real edge because I knew that they had published some really great field guides and I fit right in there and it just made a lot of sense. So, don't get discouraged if you have a different kind of book that doesn't, this just happened to be such a perfect fit
Absolutely.
for what they've already published.
Yes.
It was just a really nice seamless process and I think partly just because
Okay.
I wasn't trying to sell my personal soul writing that no one wants to read. That made it so much easier to get published.
So your personal soul writing that no one wants to read.
Yeah.
People can find that on Amazon. Is that right?
Yes, you can find it on Amazon. It's called The Place Where Buildings Go.
And you do want to read it.
I mean, you can, if
Carrie's a
maybe you're
beautiful writer.
curious about it. And if you like it, then please review it, but not if you don't like it. I don't think anyone's reviewed it at all. I thought about asking my friends, but then I'm just like, I don't know. It would be nice to have people read it, and if they like it, say
that they liked it.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure chatting with you today. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's so fun to be here. I'm so glad this podcast I think it's going to do a lot for our community, and to just have a way to talk about your writing feels really good,
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep. And we're glad to have you as the first author that we chatted with.
Thank you.
Thank you. And best of luck on future endeavors.
Thanks.
I'm Meg Bell, your host of the ACPL Local Author Podcast, brought to you by the Allen County Public Library. If you enjoyed this podcast, please show your support by liking, subscribing, and sharing it with your friends and family. Your support means everything to us.